Welcome to episode 24 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hey there, back in the home studio again.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode. New episodes are out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform so you get the latest first. Ratings and reviews are appreciated, and you can drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guest for this episode.
We just focused our last episode on the gender gap in cybersecurity, with the career field well short of other jobs for representation of women in the workplace. And on this episode, we continue a bit with an examination of network security careers to talk about another shortfall in the industry: African-American representation in the field.
To talk about the issue as well as how he got into the field and maybe throw in a few threat intelligence tips while we're at it, we welcome Roderick Chambers, cyber threat intelligence consultant with Recorded Future and security fellow with the Truman National Security Project. Roderick has a lightning talk on YouTube through the Blacks in Cybersecurity organization titled Blacks in Intelligence and Threat Hunting. Roderick, thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, thank you all for having me on this. Appreciate it. It's really good.
So just to get going, you have a very unique background really in cybersecurity because you started in a different form of intelligence first. Can you talk about how your career evolved from how you started to where you are now?
Yeah, most definitely. It's definitely a career path that I did not foresee any part of my life. Went to school, undergraduate at Texas Lutheran University, received a chemistry degree because living in Texas, you're either going to work in oil and gas or my goal was to become a pharmacist. Well, little did I know that, hard sciences, definitely an area that I just enjoyed, was really great because I worked with a lot of individuals in the government down by the coast in Corpus Christi in Ingleside, Texas, working with the Coast Guard, working with other Homeland Security officials. They just felt like I had a natural knack for dialoguing and asking the right questions with different officials, So from that point on, I got in 2008, I was extended to offer to join the federal government as a Central Intelligence Agency as an operations officer. So from that time, joining in my background, coming from Texas, I kind of felt like that was either, Ivy League school or special forces type career. But they showed me that was not the case. But human intelligence collection was going to be the core of it. You read all the books and read all and watch all the Hollywood movies, spotting, assessing, developing, and recruiting people, was the goal. But luckily for me, and I think for the rest of the world, time caught up with all of us. Technology started expanding, social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, multiple ways to communicate. Human intelligence collection operations changed it drastically with technology. And so that was a way we were kind of forced into learning about information security, how to communicate securely through technology, how to reach different people in those countries that are not open, your different ones, how to communicate with those journalists and reporters and people in those countries via technology. It opened up a whole new world.
Generally, in the beginning, it was mostly human intelligence until the whole new cybersecurity world opened up. How, in the early days, was that beginning to be talked about from, I guess, a transition into just, it's going to be an augment to the human intelligence wing to, becoming its own salient organization and group focus?
So in 2008, just the overall, you look at all the cyber breaches, nation states attacking other governments, whether that was distributed denial of service attacks or just trying to poke and find information. In 2008 was the height. Every nation state was standing up cyber operations, lots of engineers. And we can think back from about 2008, 2012, we had the Sony hack. That was big. Was it the North Koreans? Was it a splinter group? We had Stuxnet that occurred, and with the Iran situation, that's all public out there now. Then we also had the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM breach. And so you can see all of these attacks towards these governments back and forth. And little do we know, I think as humans in history, we've always seen the Cold War, human to human war and conflict that on the battlefield. But meanwhile, probably years before I joined the government in my role, there was a cyber war going on that a lot of people just didn't understand that it's occurring. And now 2020, we are in the midst of it. We know about ransomware attacks. We know about DDoS attacks. We know about the different deep and dark web forms. It becomes, commonplace now.
Yeah, this isn't just inside lingo anymore. It's something that we see in the news pretty much every day.
Yeah, exactly. It's that the mystique behind, intelligence collection. When you say intelligence, it does make you kind of tense up, like, oh, what are we doing? But it's been going on all around us. I mean, it's just, if you look at it and you really try to hone that trade craft and the idea of intelligence, we do it every single day. When we're communicating on LinkedIn and we're being very focused, where we're spotting people that can hit one of our objectives. When we're at work and we're looking for that next promotion, you're using Glassdoor and these other sites to see, how do I negotiate my salary? What job? All that is part of intelligence. It's, you're a customer, you have a goal, and you're collecting intel to reach your goal is the most efficient way possible with the least amount of mistakes. If you take it in that context, you take all the Hollywood fluff out of intel and you make it something that's very palatable for people to understand in a way that they can operationalize it.
Speaking of what the intelligence community looks like, in your lightning talk, you mentioned that Hollywood has this habit of making the hacker in the dark black hoodie sitting behind a glowing computer screen. Why do you think it's important for people to see the reality behind, what an intelligence gathering agent looks like and what their real job, entails?
It definitely goes back to the amount of information that's just readily available to people. If you do have that Hollywood mentality that, my credit card information can be stolen. No, it's going to be this major 100-man operation of stealing your credit card, or if you have someone who's trying to break into your vehicle. We have smart vehicles now. Everything's wired to the internet. CD players and Sirius XM, you can remotely open your door up. It's going to be this 100-man operation that's going to go after us. And in reality, a lot of the tools you can buy right on Amazon.com. A lot of these things, when you're sitting in Starbucks and you're using the Starbucks internet, someone can tap into your line, and it's not this sophisticated operation that we see. It's very simply, sometimes just clicking on your Wi-Fi link and typing in something that's reasonable, like Spurs go, bam, password. You would think that it would be more sophisticated, but it's really not. But that's the idea that you have to give, that it's not always going to be this 100-man operation or this nation state. It's people that look like you and me that are out there, and you're testing different things out, and you're going to gain access, sometimes unknowingly, unwittingly, and sometimes you're going to do it on purpose, but it happens all the time.
Back to your background, you're working in intelligence for the government, and you saw the cybersecurity path sort of expanding a little bit more. So what made you really shift completely over to that path and go from government to then private sector?
I spent 10 years, so I was in the last year of the Bush administration, all 8 of the Obama administration, and the first year of the Trump administration. And that 10-year mark does get to the place where you have to make a decision on, moving forward. Traveling abroad is a wonderful thing. I have family. My wife, I cared about her career very, very much, very difficult, especially when you do have spouses that have very high profile careers. She's a director of academics at a local public charter school. That's something that she could not do overseas. And so you do have to, take the opportunity to say, it's more than just myself. While I've found this crazy path called intel collection, there's different variations. I tell people, if you're truly a good intel collector, truly a good operations officer, the job never stops. You just reinvent yourself. And I reinvented myself in the private sector, still collecting intel, still providing information, valuable intelligence for my consumers, still teaching and training, just in a different form that made it beneficial for myself and my spouse to move forward.
So you talk about the early days in the cybersecurity wing with the government, that you didn't exactly have a lot of Black colleagues in the intelligence community, and you showed a few historical examples. So are you finding a similar thing in the private industries that you've shifted to ever since you moved from the public to the private industry?
It's a very interesting kind of dynamic to look at from the human intelligence perspective. The best way to build a relationship with someone is to have a lot of diversity. Certain relationships are built, whether that's female or male, the age gap, those relationships are built, and you need to have a wide net of individuals that can capture those targets. That's the same thing in the cybersecurity world that we have, is that we have a lot of individuals that are out here that you need to have that diversity. There's different companies that are opening up, especially women and minorities, especially the Black community in cybersecurity. It is very few, very qualified. But again, I think people have that idea that Hollywood thought that, this Black hat hacker that's running around and he can do these things. That Hollywood vision takes away from individuals who are very talented at their jobs, network security, different technical controls, compliance, but giving the opportunity to just go and seek those individuals as well too is a really big area. Women, one thing in cybersecurity, very few women that I know of that are in the career field. Now, there's a lot of women that are very talented, just haven't given the opportunity. So they shifted to a different career field or a different kind of category that benefited them. But we should be looking at those relationships, especially with women, and then the Black community as well too. There are different targets, different ideas, different perspectives on cybersecurity, information security that we're going to be missing blind spots on. And that can definitely be amplified, especially now.
You talked about in your video, actually, about the fact that there is that perception, and I think we found in our interview last episode as well, that there's even a perception among recruiters that somebody has to have a coding background of some kind to be involved in the cybersecurity field. You look at it as almost a business problem instead of a technical coding issue.
Exactly. I tell my team, do what we do best, and that's how cybersecurity is built. You're going to have great people who can build teams, cybersecurity teams, bring in a good coder, bring in a good network security operator, bring in a good threat intelligence consultant. They're going to build teams that managerial role. You're going to have coders who are able to break down malware, are able to use specific tools. And I want those individuals to be the best at what they're good at. And that's how you benefit the team there. And when you put all those pieces together, when you put a great manager, you build a great team, you answer the intelligence requirements for the organization, you've built an information security, cybersecurity program. And so instead of looking at those individual roles that you must be a coder or you must have 10 to 12 years of experience, you have to look and say, can the person do the job? Put them in a sandbox and then test them. Give them a real world scenario. How would I report a breach to my stakeholders? Do I report to my CFO? Do I report to my CEO? Giving them that option pool. If you're going to report to your CFO, what type of intel, what kind of type of data are you going to give them? If I can't give my CFO that data, who would I lean on to get that data to report to them? It's a structured business program development. Just take on what you're the best at and then build your team around that.
So it's really hiring managers need to be thinking that way too, and thinking that a diversity of background can help them with their cybersecurity. And job seekers, they need to see that it's something that they can look for, a career in cybersecurity based on a variety of different backgrounds that they may have.
Exactly. And you look at the community too. That diversity of those backgrounds respond to your communities and the objective for your organization. If you're in the healthcare field, you want people with that healthcare background, but you also want, especially in, like, for example, COVID, in places like Louisiana, Port Arthur, Texas, Houston, Texas, where you have a very high Hispanic and Black population. Yes, you want fluent Spanish speakers. You want people in the community that can break down the fear of, putting your information in, the teledoc, these apps, teaching the community, having a relationship with that community and know the shortfalls. That there's still places that doesn't provide internet to some people. The internet signals are weak. Well, you need to be able to have someone that understands those communities and be able to talk and coach people through that. That's where that diverse workforce comes in. If you look at it from the North versus the South, I always say I'm from Texas. Do we really want, somebody from New York or from the North telling the South what to do? Well, it's kind of the same concept. You want somebody who looks like you, who speaks the same lingo, who you can begin to trust and develop that relationship. And you're going to get a lot further with your objectives.
And I imagine that plays a large role in another point you mentioned in your talk is using intel to help communities. For example, sharing intel with Black communities to help with things like social media safety and cyberbullying, helping out communities of the elderly to avoid being scammed or to fall victim to these kinds of phishing threats that are so common these days. So how is diversity in the threat intel and that sort of communication with these communities all tied together?
Definitely when you're looking at the community, especially when you take it away from the business and the financial piece, Having a diverse group of ages of cybersecurity professionals, you're able to reach, again, it's having that commonality between people that can understand where you're coming from. If you had, answering machines that had the old tape inside of it, you can relate to someone on what to expect from that, versus someone who's never set up their voicemail, is only gone voice to text or sent directly to their email. Diversity in ages, knowing what the problems are. I think COVID really enhanced a lot of issues where the church communities, how do you get in touch with your church community for those that may be elderly or older who've never set up a Google chat or Gmail? They only use their home phone, their landline phone. When you put people in their homes and you separate them, threat actors prey on that. Now we know people are at home. So we're going to fraudulently call your landline phone because you're going to pick up because you can't go anywhere else. So you got to be at home. Mm-hmm. Knowing that intel, seeing what threat actors are targeting. During the year, IRS, before the taxes are normally due April 15th, that January to April are big years because you're preying on people who want their tax return quickly, who are looking, to put that information out. They're going to do whatever they can to get that tax return as quick as possible, not as scams pop up. This year with the census, that's another big area. Have we really received information to know what's an official census letter, official census call? Even somebody knocking on your door doing official census research. How do you know that? Well, Intel will tell you what kind of scams were out there, who's reported that we received a fraudulent mailer or receiving this particular phone call from this number with this same script that they always do. The Intel, you can feed that into the community to protect them. Polling booths that are coming up for voting, especially with the Black Lives Matter. Pride Month was just there. There was another big operation called Operation Pridefall, where groups were trying to coordinate to say, we're going to DDoS attack any company that comes out to support or shows support during Pride Month. But Intel helps companies that want to support that month go out and say, well, we got to protect our infrastructure. We're looking out for a DDoS attack. We know that this month and depending on what we put out in marketing, we're going to be targeted. You can, instead of becoming reactive, you can become proactive.
Yeah, and just arming people with knowledge at every level, like you said. That's what threat intelligence is, and it's part of that well-rounded kind of security posture where if the citizens, if your employees are aware of threats that are out there, that helps protect against breaches. And then you also, of course, then need to follow that up with some strong security measures as a company or as an individual as well.
Absolutely. That's the proactive nature of it. You prescribe just enough security so that you can continue doing your daily operations without it making it feel like you're in a new bubble. That's what I want to do. Just enough, not overdoing it where you're restricted from your movements, but just enough to make it seem like, you're doing your job in your comfort.
I think an interesting thing that you mentioned in your video in regards to the changes in the way the world feels now versus even maybe 10 years ago is, would you rather lose your cell phone or your wallet?
Yes, that is a huge concept. My spouse, she gets crazy at me because I'm very hesitant from downloading every app or allowing every app to have access to my photos and banks because it's just, we see it every day, the different Facebook posts that, it's definitely fraudulent that, Facebook will have access to your account if you don't repost this in the future, and you get those and you just have to realize that our smartphones give up an enormously crazy amount of data on us. What you purchase from Amazon, what you search on Google, it ends up popping up in your news feeds on your Instagram and your Facebook. It's kind of weird. You look up house shoes one day on Amazon, you pop up on Facebook, guess what pops up on the right-hand side? House shoes. It's kind of crazy, Even your cars. I mean, if you plug in your Starbucks in your GPS, that data is transmitted. So guess what that car is going to do? Guess what Starbucks has purchased? They might pop up an ad, What are we going to look at? Here's the next Starbucks. Here's a coupon to go with that. We give up an enormous amount of data in our phone book. Even my kids, I grew up having to memorize my home phone number, my dad's phone number, my mom's phone number. Now, kids, you just pop in your phone. If you do have a phone or iPad, you just either use the AI to call the name of the individual you want to call, or you just voice the text and, you do it now. Losing that phone, I tell my son all the time, if you lost your phone right now, could you call me? And that's a very simple thought. And he's like, no, I really can't because I've never really memorized it. Well, take that to an adult. You know, if you lost your phone, could you call your job? Could you call your parents? You know, have you really committed those numbers? And you take that a step further and think, well, you've linked your Google, your Gmail to it. And now because of COVID, you can't do a lot, you know, going visiting places. You're putting even more on your phone. You're booking reservations. You're plugging your credit cards, your debit cards. You have the Apple Watch where you just tap to pay. It's a lot of data in your phone. Losing your phone is an entire meltdown, in my opinion, for some people, versus losing the wallet. You may lose a little bit of cash that you had in a couple of pictures, but you lose your entire life on that phone. And knowing people that the way they use passwords, some passwords are so simple as 1, 2, 3, 4. It's wild. And you have access. It's not hard to jailbreak a phone. You can YouTube it. It's not hard to go on Amazon and purchase basic devices to crack open a phone, and you can buy it on Amazon. So losing your phone is a complete meltdown of your life. And people need to consider those small things. Can you call your job if you lost your phone? Have you committed it to memory? It's a wild concept. A lot of people can't do it, but it's wild. You should try it out.
Well, I've lost both before, and I can tell you the phone was a little less convenient. You can't call anyone to help find your wallet.
Exactly.
So in your last answer there, you said the magic word that pops up on this show every episode in 2020 so far, COVID. So from a threat intelligence perspective specifically, how has this pandemic changed things in your career field?
It definitely has kept me very busy. I've been busy all year. We started off January with threats of World War III with the Iran situation, and then that streamed right along into COVID that whole time. A remote workforce, a lot of companies, usually you have a plan to deploy, 100 people to a remote workforce, bring them back, test it out, fix the problems. We literally deployed, hundreds of organizations and small businesses into a remote working world. Even our school systems that did not have a virtual or remote working operating program, they were deployed within weeks. And that causes that keeps me busy. It keeps me busy. Information security, remote access. What does this mean? Active Directory. Even kids are the most creative. One way that we looked at it was virtual schooling. Kids would just go in and check the box that they said they did an exercise without actually doing the YouTube or whatever video it was. And they said, we'll come back and do it later Friday. Little did administrator, everybody else knew that, functionality. Once you check on that box for a completed activity, it would send a message back. You couldn't go back in there. So parents are going crazy. Teachers are going crazy. How do we get our grades? We deployed hundreds and hundreds of workers and students and people to a remote working world that we were not prepared for. Bandwidth usage. We have, PlayStations and Xboxes and TVs and phones all on one, network. Your bandwidth wasn't ready for that. These things take time. They're deployed in small groups with field testing. And so with COVID, and it doesn't seem like it's going to end, we're just now trying to get smart about protecting data, providing resources so people can continue to operate. It's an evolving world. There's a whole bunch of bumps in the road. Patient healthcare data, using teledoc and telemedicine, downloading apps. Threat actors are taking advantage of every single hurdle that we have to jump over. And it's causing a lot of damage that we won't be able to see. Well, some of it we'll be able to see this year, but damage will last 3, 5, even 10 years from now that we really can't quantify or really comprehend during COVID.
Yeah, I think we'll all be dealing with the fallout from this for a while. Yeah.
It's gonna be a while. So it's just buckle up. We're all in for the ride here.
Yeah. Before we go, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you got into doing the lightning talk. So this is through Blacks in CyberSecurity. So can you talk a little bit about the organization and this lightning talk series?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the things that getting out of the federal government that I wanted to do was, join. I didn't have the leeway to join a lot of organizations like Truman in the community just because of the sensitivity of the position. So when I transitioned out, I wanted to get involved with the community. And so Blacks in Cybersecurity, I met a couple of individuals at the University of Texas, San Antonio campus. And for me, seeing the word Blacks in cybersecurity, it was like, hey, there's a group for us. Like, I've never heard of this before. Shocker, you know? They're like, yeah, you, me, same. We're all here together. So you're like 10 of us, but we're here together, you know. But it kind of expanded, you know, and definitely, you know, listening to these students going through cybersecurity programs, the academic piece, and then hearing about, you know, well, once I graduated, you know, what jobs are available, you know, and jobs just were not, the recruitment was low. It was difficulty finding jobs and stuff. And so, you know, guiding people on what I've learned through on-the-job training, shifting the academic piece to the employment piece. How do you make sense of all the academic cybersecurity you've learned, and how do you get a job? And so working, you know, as I've seen Blacks in cybersecurity expand, they put an offer out, you know, for lightning talks about experiences. And I always feel like wisdom is only when you're able to give it to people. It doesn't help out if you just hold it inside. So, you know, this is my first kind of 2020, my first really big leap, reaching out to the community and the people to say, hey, I've had to build this blueprint on my own. Many of us in my field kind of did ad hoc. You just had to hold on to each other and go for that ride. But we all made it in some form, shape, or fashion. So we do have a blueprint. Let's not make it harder for the next group. Let's give them our blueprint, make it a little bit better, clean it up, and then hopefully you'll give that cleaned up version to the next person. And before you know it, there's going to be a pretty clean blueprint on how to go from, you know, academic and this idea to actually putting it in motion. So, and that's the goal with the lightning talk.
And it's got to be important for intelligence aspect of, you know, people who reflect the community, but to see people who look like them having success in this career field has got to help motivate people towards it as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's the goal. I want motivate people, let them know that there is a plan, there is success out there. It's opening up, but you know, the lessons learned that I've gone through, I hope that somebody else doesn't have to go through those lessons. Maybe it'll be different lessons they'll learn. At least the ones I've gone through, they'll be prepared for them. They'll ace those, and they'll move on to the next level.
Are there any other resources that you wanted to share at this time for us?
Definitely, you know, coming out of San Antonio, the New Leaders Council, San Antonio chapter, they're fantastic if you're looking to get involved and really expand into any part of your life. Truman National Security Project is also fantastic. You know, national link out there. And then, of course, with my current employer, Recorded Future, love them. It's very inclusive. I like it. They're moving towards threat intelligence for all. I like that motto. So thank them all for definitely keeping me moving forward.
All right, Roderick, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate your time.
Certainly. Thank you all for having me on. I appreciate it. Anytime.
For some of the links that Roderick discussed, including a link to his lightning talk, to Blacks in Cybersecurity, and some resources for those looking for help getting into a cybersecurity career, check out the description, and we have plenty of those there for you. And now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a look at some top stories from the cybersecurity world and what they may mean to you. We'll start with headline number 1. Hundreds arrested after police infiltrate secret criminal phone network. So this sounds like something a little bit from a movie, almost too crazy for a movie, really. But the secret criminal phone network referenced in the headline is called EncroChat, an encrypted messaging service used exclusively by criminals, roughly 60,000 around the world, referred to as a, quote, criminal marketplace for things like money laundering, distributing stolen goods, even ordering hits.
Right. And as you mentioned, police groups in Europe recently cracked into the system. None of the stories that I've read have made it quite clear exactly how or why that happened. But that information was shared around with Europol. So lots of coordination over country lines and so forth. And really, there's been quite a few arrests in many countries that have resulted from this. It's sort of like having an inside man in every criminal organization around the whole continent. So quite a large payoff for this operation.
Yeah, the most backstory that I've been able to find is just sort of when the hack began. So Dutch and French authorities back in 2016 infiltrated the platform and started sharing that intelligence throughout Europe. and just continued to monitor. And it seems like maybe the reason why this raid of sorts happened altogether earlier in July was because in mid-June or so, the operators of EncroChat seemed to finally realize that they had been hacked and warned everyone to drop their devices. But 4 years of intelligence probably didn't make too much of a difference to drop that device in June.
Right, there's a little too late for that.
So, yeah, you mentioned hundreds of arrests, really. The UK's National Crime Agency says it has made 746 arrests, seized $68 million worth of cash, 77 firearms, and more than 2 tons of drugs during what they call Operation Venetic. They get even more specific as to the types of things that they seized. The guns included submachine guns, handguns, 4 grenades, an AK-47 assault rifle, and more than 1,800 rounds of ammunition, as well as more than 28 million Tizilam pills, which is another name for street Valium.
Right. This actually is also linked to a couple other stories that were in the news last week that I remember reading. Dutch police discovered what was essentially a torture chamber hidden inside of shipping containers based on this same intelligence. So potentially a lot of lives and property saved here due to this hack, I guess you'd call it. A good white hat hack.
Yeah, right. Authorities have said that these arrests have saved more than 200 people from either being killed or kidnapped or tortured, like you said. Basically, this is suggesting that they have infiltrated a number of top-level organized crime organizations in Europe and basically obliterated a lot of them.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. So yeah, basically the way this EncroChat worked was that people would actually buy handsets, so a mobile device with a 6-month contract, and it came preloaded with these instant messaging apps that were encrypted. They could also make calls, and there was also a kill code that could be used to wipe the devices remotely in case of an emergency. I believe that did not work out for them in the end.
I didn't find exactly how long this has been going. We know how long the app had been under some type of surveillance, but I don't know how long EncroChat had been functioning prior to police knowledge of it. So I don't know if it was successful for a while and then all of a sudden things went wrong, or maybe somebody found out about it pretty quick in the authority world too. I don't know.
Yeah, this is definitely something I had never heard about until this story broke. So it makes you wonder how many other of these other encrypted secret messaging services are out there.
Yeah, so it was run basically through a command and control server type situation, which is basically a computer or computers controlled by a cyber criminal, usually used for cyber crime to send commands to systems compromised by malware and get stolen data back. So they rigged it up in sort of a similar fashion to send out those commands to the actual clients who had those handsets that you were talking about. And it's just crazy to think that, people are getting hits sent out through a chat app, basically.
The winky face emoji.
Yeah, right. Actually, funnily enough, I don't know if you watched Westworld at all, but in the most recent season of Westworld, there was sort of an app that was designed for just criminals, so they would almost bid on a crime that they could commit to get paid to do something like that. So it actually reminded me of that when I first read this story.
Wonder how big of an industry black market app development is now. That's something you don't have a lot of data on, I suppose.
Well, we know there's definitely a gap in service now in Europe. So if somebody has a good idea for how to put one together, then now might be the time.
Got to get some investors together.
Now for headline number 2. Signal's new PIN feature worries cybersecurity experts. So to continue on our theme of encrypted chat apps, we move on to a less nefarious one called Signal. For those who don't know, Signal is used by those in the know in cybersecurity to communicate privately via chat and calls. It was once recommended by Edward Snowden and has been recommended by many others over the years. And you'll see a lot of investigative journalists maintaining an account as well to talk to sources who may otherwise be a bit shy.
Right. This is a chat app that's encrypted end to end, so very secure. A lot of people turn to this for security reasons when they see other social media apps in the news, such as, TikTok and Facebook, with all sorts of issues going on. People have a lot of incentive to find a sort of less intrusive app. And so Signal is a great option, or has been, apparently up until this point, where some changes are being made. And now that is up for further debate as to its security.
Yeah, so one of the main appeals of Signal, especially for those who really want to be secretive about their correspondence, has been that it doesn't collect much information at all about its users. So when subpoenaed, for instance, it has virtually nothing to turn over. Though the feature that we are talking about here today is a new feature that has drawn some criticism. It allows users to recover certain data such as contacts, profile information, settings, and blocked users. Signal will be storing that data on servers that the company owns, protected by a PIN that the app had initially just asked users to add, but now has forced them to add.
Yes, now a requirement. So, point of this change, according to the makers of Signal, is to eventually move away from having your accounts based on phone numbers to instead just be based on a standard login username. Part of this in order to make the app a little more user-friendly in terms of transferring contacts to new phones, potentially even message history between devices. So this is sort of the classic considerations of security versus convenience argument.
Yeah, and I think that's where the clash seems to be coming from, because most of the early adopters of Signal and probably the power users of Signal are the ones who value the security over the convenience. They would much prefer it to be, as one person said in this article, a dumb app, more or less, that doesn't do anything other than allow for these folks to get on and communicate with each other. But the makers of Signal may be looking at trying to find ways to monetize it a little bit better, make it more popular. And to do that, they need to make it more user-friendly so that they can draw people who are used to using other types of messaging apps like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, things like that.
Right. This is sort of the classic story of a service or product migrating away from its core user group that really built it up. So, and it's a fair question to ask. How do you balance, the need to grow and actually make money and expand your user base versus playing to that niche role that you originally set out to hit?
Right. Yeah. And it's definitely a tricky needle to thread. And obviously, they're running into some issues trying to thread it. So already, because of some of the pushback, Signal is reportedly going to add the ability to disable pins for some advanced users, which would negate the feature that you would be able to get your contacts back every time you sign in. But it looks like they're trying to still appeal to those original power users as well.
Right. It makes you wonder what those some advanced users might need exactly. Is that a premium feature you pay for, or is that a complaint enough and we'll let you turn it off?
Yeah, right. And it'll be interesting to see how this develops. And just like we were talking about in the criminal world with a potential gap in encrypted apps now, you wonder if somebody else will see some type of an opportunity here. This particular article does not talk about an alternative to Signal, but we know that
apparently there's a demand.
Yeah, there's already a demand just based on a few of the experts that were interviewed in this piece that have threatened to move away from Signal. So the security issues that people are concerned with, not just about the fact that this PIN has been forced on them, but it also means that now that this data is going to be retained, that means there's a place that people can hack it. And the methodology for how they're planning to retain this data is such that a number of the more advanced users are basically saying that a good hacker can find their way into this data pretty easily.
Right. Yes. So it's a pretty simple equation, which is going to be more secure not having that data stored anywhere versus having it stored anywhere. Obviously, the more hackable is if you have that data sitting on a server somewhere.
Right. And the other concern that some users are pointing out is maybe they're not that worried about their contact lists being stored somewhere, but they are concerned about a potential next step. So you mentioned the usability argument that Signal is making, and one of the features that they've talked about is storing messages for people who want them to be stored. And there's a concern for the people who don't want them to be stored that just like the PIN was foisted upon them, more or less, that a feature including message storage could be foisted as well.
Right. It starts as an optional service, and then eventually you have to be some advanced users in order to stop using it.
Yeah, right. And so if the messages, these secret encrypted messages, are then actually stored somewhere, then that really negates any level of the security that you would be, the security and privacy that some people are using Signal for.
So this kind of reminds me a lot of every time we talk about the Internet of Things devices that come up in our other headlines, talking about the balance between security and just making something user-friendly so you can sell it. That seems to be a pretty common theme in the network security world that needs to be eventually sorted out.
Yeah, and I think there always will get to a point where both things can coexist, but there are shortcuts that some places and some organizations are taking to, just get to that user-friendly point, or they're just concerned with the security, so they don't worry so much about the user-friendly experience. But yeah, this one definitely started out on the security side and is trying to sort of retrofit the app to become more of a user-friendly thing, which is sort of the opposite of what we see in the Internet of Things world.
Right.
On to headline number 3. Biden campaign hires top cybersecurity officials to defend against threats. So the presidential campaign of Vice President Joe Biden announced that it has filled positions of Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Technology Officer to address potential cybersecurity threats to the campaign. So this is sort of new territory, fairly new territory for campaigns to do, which is to have IT professionals and security professionals, cybersecurity professionals in particular, actually working for them. So Pete Buttigieg's that sounds funny when I say it, campaign last year was considered one of the first to hire a position like this. And so Biden's campaign is following suit, and President Trump's campaign also says they have cybersecurity folks in there.
He was a little more vague in his response.
Yeah.
He just said he has people for that. So
got people for that, yeah.
Right. Maybe he's got a managed security provider out there.
Could be, yeah.
Apparently, Biden is still also on the lookout for a couple of other positions to fill, a senior cloud security architect as well as a senior cyber incident response analyst position still remain open. So this isn't just a couple people being hired, just to check a box. This is a pretty fleshed out, thorough team they've built, obviously in response to hackings in 2016 and really just every week and month and year since then, it seems like.
Yeah, even if we didn't have evidence of elections being tampered with back in 2016 and probably, well, we know since as well, even if we didn't have evidence of that, it's just a smart thing to do because it's a pretty high profile target out there, and that there are people who have vested interest in outcomes, so there are always going to be people looking to get some kind of an advantage. And we know that Russia has been implicated in a number of things, but other nation states can be involved, and other hacker groups that may just have some type of an agenda. Just anybody can pay to have somebody mess around a little bit with a campaign. So seems like the responsible thing to do here.
Right. As you said, there have been a number of other cases So I believe Russian agents were indicted by Robert Mueller for the 2016 presidential campaign hacks. There have been, I guess, not sightings, but cases where Iranian hackers were found attempting to hack into the Trump administration or the Trump campaign files. So obviously there's a lot on the line here and a lot of people with some sort of incentive.
Right. Google threat researcher also announced that his team had found evidence of Chinese hackers targeting Biden campaign staff in addition to the Iranian hackers targeting Trump. And, it's just something that is out there. Campaigns are more and more online. We know the DNC hack that had occurred a few years ago as well, where information was leaked. We also have heard somebody talking about his opponent's emails a few times here and there too, in terms of security. So there's been a lot of information out there that we know is either in the cloud or stored in some other manner that is very hackable. So we're not even really getting into the whole side of things with influence happening on Facebook and bots and things like that. This is just straight up having access to private information from a campaign, which is pretty explosive stuff if you can get it.
Right. So focusing back in on the Biden campaign, these two hires, the chief information security officer that was hired is Chris DeRusha, previously served in the White House as well as the Department of Homeland Security, and he has also led enterprise vulnerability management at Ford. So pretty big name with a lot of experience. A lot of people are giving this a pretty good head nod of approval as a hire.
Yeah, going back to, I'll just say, Mayor Pete, his campaign from last year, he was, again, considered the first of the Democratic candidates to hire a CISO, and his former CISO said in a statement that the Biden campaign's decision was a major step in the right direction, and as you said, endorsed the particular hires that were made as well.
Right. And then for the CTO, we got Jackie Chang, who works as a senior technologist at Schmidt Futures and is taking unpaid leave to work on the campaign.
Yep. So it's another way, too, that, campaigns always want people involved who can bring their own expertise to the table. And in this case, these are top experts in cybersecurity in the field, and they are interested in joining the campaign. So something that I'm sure the former vice president is happy to have these people on board.
Right. Well, let's just hope nobody gets hacked this time.
Unfortunately, that's probably unlikely, but well, hopefully it won't be too bad. Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, and thanks again to Roderick Chambers for joining us. Check out the links in the description for Roderick's lightning talk, information on Blacks in cybersecurity, a number of other resources for potential career seekers, and of course the headlines we discussed, and much, much more. Subscribe or follow now however you listen to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available, and please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to
get secure, stay secure.